Hello and welcome to another lighting diagram lesson. My name is Trenton Hoshiko, and today we're talking about Van Gogh's Iris from 1889. Before we get started, and if you've been here before, you already know what I'm about to say. If you want to get my free Filmmaker Tools template up here, it is absolutely free. You don't even have to sign up or anything like that. It's available for my Patreon, patreon.com/TrentonHoshiko, and the direct link for that is down in the video's description. This is a template for Drawya, which is a free and open source diagramming software, and I put it out there for free just to help people out in diagramming their own images, communicating with their teams, and trying to grow as filmmakers, cinematographers, and photographers. If you want to learn how to get started with it and import images and all that kind of stuff, I do have some guide videos. Those are linked down in the video's description as well. And if you do end up liking this video, please do give it a like down below. That really helps me reach new viewers who also like lighting diagram and cinematography type discussion videos. I actually can't tell you how much that helps out my videos when people give them likes. It's silly how useful that is. And so today's image is kind of a weird one. It's a little bit different than the types of things we usually talk about, which are portraits or still lives. And, you know, technically this is not a still life. The plant is growing and alive, and there's lots of plants that are growing on alive in this image. And also it's not a human portrait, but it's a portrait in terms of being an object portrait, but the medium itself and Van Gogh's style obfuscates the shape and the form a little bit in a way that I think is kind of interesting to talk about. And I love the ideas of how this image works and how we could make an image that looks like this using a photographic medium. And no, we are not going to get it to look exactly like this. We aren't going to possibly be able to do that because there's limitations of the medium itself. That's why we have different mediums to do different things. But if you're inspired by something like this, how can you get looks that might be similar or inspired by? That's the question I'm seeking to answer. So let's talk about how this image works some. So we obviously have our iris here, and while it looks like we don't really have shadow, we actually do. The shadow is just instead these kinds of dark lines all around it. In my opinion, this image is actually very flat. The iris itself, however angle we're looking at it, is against the backdrop of the rest of the field of grass and, you know, maybe like dandelions or whatever these little yellow spots are. They could be other flowers, and it's all having this kind of vibrant motion. It's almost swaying. So I want to note that because maybe we're going to use a longer lens to kind of compress space a little bit, but I think that we might use some lens filtering and a smaller aperture to push the focus out on our background here so it looks like a kind of cohesive background. Instead of extending off into the distance, I want that to be pretty flat behind our subject. I want the top edge right here and the bottom edge right here, you know, right behind our plant subject to look like a singular plane almost. You could do something even more creative with like a tilt shift lens or a lens baby type lens for achieving that, because those are really specialty tools. I'm going to talk about more ideas of making that background cohesive. Let's use a smaller aperture. Maybe let's shoot this at like a 2.8 or something like that. Let's use some lens diffusion, which will make the whole image have a little bit of blur to it in this way that makes everything kind of creamy and smoothed together, especially in those areas. It might change the bokeh a little bit, depending on what kind of lens diffusion you're using, like a black pro mist, for example. We can use tools like that on the camera itself to help influence the nature of the image to look more like this. But then at the same time, we do have these shadows. That's just the hard lines here. And they're all on the right side pretty much when they're really dark. And we have a little bit on the left side, like over here, but they're kind of all helping sway and shape the motion feel for this. But by and large, they're on the right side. We do get them there, and we do have them kind of over here additionally. And so I want to try to figure out how we can get some sharp edges with lots of edge contrast while also having the light be relatively flat otherwise. that's the challenge here to me, and I think that's going to be pretty fun. To me, then in that way, we're getting these white areas that are a little bit brighter points, and we have the dark areas, which are sort of our shadows, but they're almost like hash mark shadows. Right here, I think is the perfect example. We have on the bottom side of the leaf, this shadow look, but the leaf itself is very evenly exposed, except for a couple little highlights on top, but the rest of it's very even, just like the evenness of the tone of the rest of the image. And then underneath it, that grassy, whatever fern or other plant this is, also has some of those hash marks underneath it. So to recap, on the camera, we're going to be using a longer lens, trying to compress that space a little bit. You could use something like a tilt shift lens or a lens baby if you really wanted to, but because those are so specialized, I'm not going to talk about that here. And we're going to use some lens diffusion. Let's just go with black pro mist for the sake of ease of conversation here. And so that's what we're starting with. Long lens, black pro mist, smaller aperture, somewhere around a 2.8. Let's aim for. That might likely mean that you'll need some neutral density filtering in terms of either on camera or on your lens as well to get our exposure to be, within the realm of possibility and not completely blown out. That will really depend on where you're shooting, when you're shooting, how low your lens can actually go, the camera body, all that kind of stuff. But just keep in mind that you might need neutral density filtering for this. But by and large, besides those little bit of shadows and that little bit of shaping and the harder edges, everything here is incredibly even in tone. If you just look at a sample like this, just straight across, this is all very even though we have foreground things that are part of our subject and the background, it's on top of each other visually and also tone wise. So we want this to look really, really tonally similar and cohesive and consistent all the way across the image while having that shaping and this interesting perspective. And this is a difficult one to wrap our heads around a little bit. This is very different than what we are often talking about because this image is more abstracted. And when we're talking about more abstracted, we're talking about feelings more than exact representation and exact replication. But hey, that's what makes things a lot more fun, in my opinion. As soon as you start reaching there, you have to reach inside of yourself and inside of your toolkit and say, how am I going to be doing this? Not just on a technical level, but on an emotional level, even more so than what we're talking about with standard image references. I just have these notes here so that we can all keep that in our minds as we're talking about this without me having to repeat it a million times and annoying everybody. So presumably this is going to be outdoors, so I'm not going to really actually build a floor plan here. I am going to have us have a plant. There we go. That's our plant. And we're going to take some diffusion and make it so that we have a very, very soft look here. And we do that by putting this as a large piece, maybe a 6x6 or a 12x12 even. And we're going to put that right over. I'm going to not fill this anymore so that we can actually see what's going on here. Let's split the difference and call it an 8x8. This could be a legitimate 8x8, this could be a legitimate 6x6, or you could be using something like a 5-in-1 reflector. They make really large ones now that I think the biggest ones are like 6x8 feet or so. And the core piece of those is a silk diffusion type material. It's not going to be probably as good as a legitimate silk. It's not going to be as easy to use as a legitimate silk or other diffusion material, but you could use that and still have a very big diffusion material without the complexity and expense of a real 8x8. You could also use a shower curtain for diffusion. I have videos about that. I can link those down in the video description. The shower curtain material I think is really great and really useful. It won't be quite the same level of diffusion as a silk though. So just keep that in mind. Whatever diffusion material you have will probably be what you have to work with, but we're trying to get this to be really soft and really consistent. And the idea here is that we're putting this right above our subject so that all of this area from all the way back here, even if this is like 3 feet behind it, right back here, we want it to all be affected by the shading and diffusing effect of our giant piece of diffusion. And honestly, that means that we're just going to take the sun, and our sun is going to be somewhere like here, let's say. This diffusion frame is going to be catching all of that light and making it all diffuse. So in theory, if the sun's here or the sun's here, this will look relatively the same because we are just literally a couple feet, maybe I would probably put this like 2 feet, 3 feet above the iris for this look. You can angle it a little bit depending exactly where the sun is. Like if it's here or if it's here, you might angle it with, you know, the bottom edge here being high. If it's right here, the top edge here might be a little high. But by and large, we want this to be consistent all the way across our iris and the field around it. Our camera will sit somewhere like right here, and we're going to try to use a longer lens. Depending exactly on how high you have this up, you might have to be a little bit closer, kind of depends, but these are our kind of wish lists, right? And this is a basically flat image. The lighting is so consistent all the way across it. The only reason that we have any extra detail is because of these black lines. And so then what I'm going to say we're going to do is we're going to use a lamp. Now, you have to keep in mind that this is probably going to need to be a pretty powerful lamp, because we're competing with the sunlight. Even though this is shaded with that diffused light, it's still competing with the sun. So just really do keep that in mind, that you are going to need a pretty powerful lamp to do this. But we're going to take our lamp and we're going to cast straight across our subject here. I would say that we could angle this down ever so slightly to try to only get it on the tops of the irises and their leaves. And then that way we get that bottom edge to be a little bit darker, but really we want it going left to right so that we get the dark side on the right side more often than not. I'm going to say that to make this light just even more powerful, let's use a Fresnel on it. So that way we can really focus that light in and use that flood to spot to control that sharpness of the light landing on our iris here. I would say we could also use some barn doors on the front of that Fresnel, and that would allow us to cut it just a little so that we kind of create a streak that it's in. But what we're hoping for is that where the light falls on the ground itself is being filled in so much by this really, really soft source here that we're not getting much of a shadow at all. We really want the only shadowed areas to be just the tips of these leaves so that we can get that shaping to it. I actually have a clip from one of my examples videos a little while back. I think it might have been the silk versus shower curtain video, where I use a hard light coming from the back of a fake plant to try to catch all the edges and, you know, create that shaping. So that kind of looked like this, and you do see the highlights and that kind of edge light aspect to it. We're focused less here on an edge light and more on creating that shadow, but you can see how this is a similar idea. It's coming from a similar place. And you will then also need to manipulate the Fresnel and the lamp, maybe if it's dimmable, hopefully it's dimmable because that makes things a lot easier, to try to dial in how much you want of this shadow and the shaping on the leaves. Keep in mind, in my opinion, your goal is to have the shaping and the sharpness on the leaves, where we've talked about that before in terms of creating texture and sharpness and grabbing those details with hard light. But this image is overall really flat. So because that flatness is more prominent than the sharpness and these edges of the irises, I would aim towards the flatness rather than more edges. More edges might create more shadows. Try to balance those two out while retaining the flatness overall. We want shape on the iris, but overall flat and very consistent. If we're getting a huge hot spot right here, then that's not going to look as much like this image. Now, that could be fine. You know, this is an inspiration for somebody. That could be fine for you. Great. run with it. But in terms of recreating it, we're trying not to just have a hot spot right here. We want our light to be very consistent, and then that sharpness to help us create edges. That's our goal for our light right here. And yeah, the sun could be anywhere over here or over here, really. It could be basically anywhere all the way around, and this diffusion material should be catching that light and making it very omnidirectional right below it. And then so let's for a moment talk about post-production. This is how I would shoot this. Usually I try to do, here's an alternate version. This is really how I would shoot this and kind of the best way to do it. Like I said, you're probably going to need a more powerful lamp. You're going to need the Fresnel, you're going to need the barn doors to really make this work. There's not really just a simply cheaper way to make this one. But what we're going to talk about here is now post-production, because we have, in theory, the background kind of, blurred and diffused between the black pro mist and the 2.8. We're going to have to use some ND to help make sure we have balanced exposure there. We're using our long lens to kind of flatten this out just a little bit, and we're angling it towards the ground so that everything behind that is very flat. That helps us with this a lot. The lighting itself is very flat, and we're getting just some shaping from our Fresnel over here. Once we take this to post-production, we can do digital tricks to make this look more like this if you wanted to. How it's set up right here might be the extent that you want to be inspired by this. But if you want it more, you can use things like, edge detection. You can use unsharp mask to make the contrast of those edges go up even higher. And because unsharp mask basically works on the parts that are already more contrasty, that should mostly affect the iris itself rather than that background. You could even go as far as doing something like a posterization, although that then kind of fully moves it to a different style, but that's possible if you want to. For me, I probably would leave it as such and then use some unsharp mask to control how prominent those edges are for a shot like this. And so yeah, this was a really different kind of image. I had a lot of fun talking about it and trying to figure out ways that we could translate this type of image and this type of look into a photographic medium. I think the hardest images that I do are the ones that I have on my list that are done by Van Gogh, because he pushes the mediums that he used to kind of their extremes in terms of color and shape and flatness and form and, all these different things, having a lot of motion in it in ways that are harder to recreate in a photographic medium. And to me, that is the beauty of different mediums. Different artists using different mediums, having different styles, even different artists within the same medium having different styles. It's all so fascinating to me, and I love the idea that anybody who's an artist can create something that is similar but entirely different than the next person using the same exact subject or the same exact script or the same exact camera, because everybody brings their own fingerprints to it. And that's what is so beautiful about art, in my opinion. Your experiences, your understanding, your technical know-how, as well as your emotions and your storytelling will always be right there on it. And that's what makes it so powerful. Even for something as simple as doing commercial work or a headshot, but also extending all the way to, professional feature films or abstract painting or sculpture or pottery. It's all the same in terms of how you are putting your sometimes literal fingerprints into the things that you make as an artist. And I think one step further that's wonderful is when you're inspired by a different artist to make something in the medium that you use that references or, is inspired by their artwork. I think that's so cool. And so that wraps us up here. If you want to get this free Filmmaker Tools template for Draw.io, it is available on my Patreon. That direct link is down in the video's description. If you want to join my Patreon and support these lighting diagrams and artistic discussions, as well as my cinematography videos in general, that link is also in the video's description. I have free and paid tiers that start at just $2. And I want to say a big thank you to everybody who's gone over there and joined already. I really appreciate your support. If you want to pick up the kinds of tools that I've been talking about here, I will have some affiliate links down in the video's description. Those help support the channel at no extra cost to you. If you liked this video, please give it a like. That really helps me with the YouTube algorithm and reaching new viewers who also like these kinds of videos. And if you want to see more lighting diagrams and discussion about micro-budget cinematography, lighting, and micro-budget filmmaking in general, you can subscribe. I'm currently striving to get to 1,500 subscribers. This week, take care of yourselves, take care of people around you, wear a mask in public to help reduce illness transmission, and take a moment to view some art that you really enjoy, whether that is a book, whether that's music, or it's a movie, a painting. Open access art online opens our world and our minds to so many different artists all across history, all around the world, and it just is such a great opportunity. So take some time this week, even if it's 5 minutes, to go explore something art-wise that inspires you, makes you feel creative, and makes you feel connected to the world around you. And most of all, I hope you have a wonderful week ahead of you. Peace.